Hi Glenn here, the People's Carpenter. It's a slightly rainy Sunday afternoon. It's only just started raining. But whenever it does rain in here, I like to comment on the fact that I like the sound of it. If you're someone who doesn't know what they're talking about when it comes to woodwork, who doesn't know anything about it, I might sometimes sound like I know what I'm talking about. I can kind of get away with that and give the impression that I do. And sometimes I do. And sometimes I don't. I regard myself as still quite new at this. I don't know how long it takes to not be a newbie anymore, because we're still learning a lot all the time, all the way until our heart stops beating, I suppose. But there's a lot that I don't know, and there's some evidence of it of this channel. There is proof that I am a noob. Remember, I don't know, it wasn't my first video, it could have been my second, third. It was in my first few videos where I had just unboxed a nice set of chisels, a couple of nice set of chisels, and I went through them. I had some bevel bench chisels and some nice dovetail chisels and some mortising chisels, and I also had this saw. At the time I called it a tenon saw. I knew that I was going to need a tenon saw for traditional joinery. I'd never had a tenon saw, never used one before, so I went on to Marketplace and I looked for a saw that was called a tenon saw, because I realized that some of them were quite expensive. Certainly expensive new, and I found one on Marketplace that was cheap, and by cheap I mean it was second hand. It was a nice vintage looking saw, which is something that appeals to me, and it was being sold for less than $100 New Zealand, which is pretty cheap for a nice vintage tool. So I bought it, and I unboxed it on that video, and it looked like this. And at the time I thought, this is a really big saw. Is it really a tenon saw? Because had I known anything, I would have recognized as soon as it arrived, oh no, I've made a mistake. The dimensions of the saw were clearly listed in the listing where I bought it. I can't show it to you now because fortunately I've managed to sell it on to someone else, and I explained exactly what it is. It's a mitre box saw. The blade was about, I forget now, and I'm not going to go and look it up, but it could have been 30 centimeters long or thereabouts, way bigger than a tenon saw. But I just sort of looked at it and thought, well, the guy said it was a tenon saw, maybe it is. It clearly wasn't. I was that much of a noob, I just didn't know. Now, and shortly after that incident, I did a whole lot of learning about tenon saws, and now I can tell you quite a few things about them, about the fact that they're basically quite small rip saws. They cut along the grain. They've got the rip tooth formation. They're maybe up to 16 inch. That would be quite a large one. They come smaller than that as well, and so on. I've actually bought what looks like, what appears to be, I haven't touched it yet, a nice tenon saw and a nice dovetail saw. Two saws that have a few things in common, but they are different. But I haven't opened them. I'm going to do an unboxing when I come to use them shortly on a project coming up. But yeah, I didn't know anything. And then there was a much more recent incident as well. In fact, just the other day. I might be tempted to think, yeah, but those were the early days. I wouldn't make a silly mistake like that now. I know stuff. Not really. So I was going through my plane collection in the last video that I made. Even though it's quite a small collection, I'm kind of proud of it. I like hand planes, even though I'm not the best at using them. I'm getting okay at using them, but I do like them. There's a certain romance about them as a very old school type of tool. No electricity involved, just the power of a man's muscles, as mediated via the tool into the wood, making these incredible, delicate shavings. I like hand planes. And when I picked up this one, I just said in passing that it's a block plane. It's a Stanley number 180 is what I said at the time. And I then got a comment. I should have noted his name. but you know, you're watching now probably. I've got a comment saying, oh, actually that's a Stanley number 130. 130 double-ended block plane. I thought, 130? I thought, no, because when I called it a 180, I was just reading the number off there. But so I said to myself, well, sounds like this guy knows what he's talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about. So I just said, well, you know, mine's got 180 stamped on it, not 130. Maybe because I happen to know that this is about 180 millimeters long. I said maybe what they did is they put the length of the plane rather than the number of the plane. But I was thinking to myself, that's kind of weird. And I realised that I was bumping into areas where I didn't really know much, because I until I actually looked down at it and read the stamp, I didn't know what number this was. And the guy commented, oh yeah, Stanley made lots of these block planes, 130s. 180 is actually this other kind of plane. I thought to myself, that is kind of weird. So I came back out to the workshop and looked at it. I thought, no, that's 180. Huh. It's also really dusty. So I gave it a wipe. And then I thought, now it says 130. Just as well I didn't sort of dig my heels in and go, no, it's definitely a 180. What are you talking about? Because I know that I don't really know this sort of thing. So there you go. Another illustration of the fact that I don't really know that much. Although now I know that this is a 130. Or when I was looking at my rapier plane, which actually looks like quite an intriguing tool, and I am looking forward to tearing that down, I commented on the fact that Rapier is a British company, and because I had just been looking up Rapier to learn some things about it, because this was an unfamiliar brand to me. I said it's a British company. I said just like Stanley is British. And then one of my most familiar commenters piped up and said, oh, well, actually, I'm a proud American, and I just want to note that Stanley is an American company. And I thought, what? And it turns out, yes, that is true. I looked up a bunch of information. I now know. See, what happens is I make mistakes. Then as a result of finding out that I've made a mistake, I then start to learn lots about something. So, it's not a bad thing to do. I now know a bunch of information about Stanley. So, yeah, it turns out that Stanley, the company now known as Stanley, it was actually called, but there are a couple of companies involved, but the one of interest to me is called the Stanley Rule and Level Company. That's the part of the Stanley business that makes the tools. There was another part that made bolts for doors, miscellaneous facts that I'm picking up, and they two eventually merged. But the Stanley Rule and Level Company was founded in America in the mid-19th century, and its headquarters is still there in, not Britain, but New Britain, Connecticut. So there you go, and that came as a surprise to me. So why did I think that Stanley was British? And I imagine I'm not the only one, because, and this was a big learning opportunity for me, my Stanley planes are all stamped. Well, not all of them are stamped with a location. Some of them don't have one at all, like this block plane, for example. But those that are stamped with a location say, made in England. So I thought, well, of course they're British. And I now know that there was a renowned fine toolmaker, very famous toolmaking factory toolmaking company and factory in England called J.A. Chapman. J.A. Chapman, also founded in the mid-19th century. That seems to be kind of the heyday for great tool manufacturers to spring into existence. Now I know that now I know, in the 1930s, Stanley bought the controlling shares of that company, renaming the company Stanley Tools GB, Great Britain. And shortly after that, they made the planes that are now sitting on my bench and over there on my shelf. So, that was something new. So Chapman had this excellent reputation of making great tools, and their reputation continued even after Stanley bought the company. And so I don't know that you can now, but for some time, some of the tools that Chapman was famous for, like its brace, for example, its brace drill, was still being sold under the name Chapman by Stanley. In fact, I managed to find a picture of that. But yeah, that was interesting. So There was a British company called Stanley making planes, but it's not really true that Stanley was a British company, because the parent company that owned the whole works was in America. But there is, I guess part of me wanted to think of them as a British company too. There is this sort of romance of England just being older than America as it is. My ancestry is from the UK, although not England. It's Irish and Scottish. There's the legacy of British steel and so on. So I just like the thought of old metal British tools, but they're not. Well, these ones are, but the company is not. So yeah, look, there are some things that I'm fairly good at. I'm fairly new to this tool business, but I'm fairly good at speaking and sounding confident. So sometimes it might sound like I know more than I actually do, but I really value having people like you in the comments telling me new stuff, or telling me where it seems like don't be a jerk about it. Unfortunately, no one's done that so far, but just let me know. Say, hey, you said this thing, but actually, because I know that there are, not so much in my channels, but on the internet generally, there are people who like to comment and be disagreeable and say, actually, you're wrong. But I do actually appreciate people who clearly know more than I do, have been doing this for longer than I have, speaking up and educating me, and I guess making me more like you when it comes to your knowledge. I am very grateful for that. So I am a noob, and you are going to see plenty more evidence of just how much of a noob I am. How long will that last? Well, probably for the rest of my life. But this noob is thankful to have people around to make me less of a noob. Long may it continue.